You are listening to a monastery podcast. I'm Harley Matthews, and I host this podcast as a space that exists to intersect theology, religious history, and culture, all with a bend toward the heavy. I want to thank you for listening. I encourage you to take the time to share, comment, and like this podcast, and to be notified of future episodes. I got to sit down with Ryan Remington of A Sacred Rebellion. I know some of the promotional material said A Sacred Collective, but it is A Sacred Rebellion. And he's becoming a really good friend and is doing some incredible work. We got to meet up and chat about his book that is already out on Amazon, Conflation. It's a set of meditations and talking about pluralism. It really does a great job at intersection. And then some other work that's coming out this year. I hope you enjoy the conversation. It's edited. If you're interested in looking at the full unedited, I would invite you to join me on Patreon. Paid subscribers get opportunity to hear longer form dialogue and conversation. And it's about the price of a coffee. To join me there, you can also join for free. Free folks get the majority of material as well. Previous podcasts that are 12 to 15 minutes. But for the long form unedited things, I invite you to consider a way of supporting my work. So without further ado, the conversation between Ryan Remington and myself for Monastery Podcast. Day one of 2025, which is looking to be a wild year for both of us, I think, in a lot of ways. And for the world. How's it going? How's it feel day one?
I woke up this morning, took the dog out, and it was like crisp morning. So I really got into that. And then she tried to murder a neighbor. So that's how 2025 started, with my dog threatening to kill somebody. Yeah, and then I've spent the day watching comedy on YouTube. So
nice.
I can't complain.
Right on. Yeah, that feels like a good start, like humor.
Yeah.
As a like overpressure or whatever day one. We woke up late, went and got some food, and then I'm here. Like, yeah. I feel like I'm in my brain. I was like, oh, I should read. I should get ahead on this class, whatever. And I'm like, if I give myself one day,
yep,
it'll be okay. How would you introduce yourself? So, author, speaker, pastor, theologian. Is that a weird word for you?
I would say none of those things. They all feel too heady, I guess. Yeah. I'm just a guy that's trying to figure things out. I think we have a mutual online friend, Ryan Cagle. And Ryan constantly yells at me for selling myself short.
Good on Ryan. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's one of those things where, like, I don't feel like I'm doing anything all that differently than other people that are in my situation or who have similar experiences. So to attach labels to it for me almost takes away from the authenticity of what I'm trying to do, I think. So if you look at any of my social media accounts, my personal ones, there's a couple of jokes. One, that I'm lowborn. People think trailer trash is offensive, even though I say it with pride. So I go with lowborn. I'm probably sweating in an air-conditioned room, which is true. I'm a big, fat, hairy dude, so I'm always sweating. And then the third thing, not really a joke, it's the truth, but I'm married to the epitome of grace and mercy. So I guess that's how I would introduce myself.
Yeah, I love it. I love it so much. I there's that strange balance, right? And I love the lowborn. I kept reading lowbrow when I first found you online, and I was like, yeah, oh, that's kind of cool. And and I think just this last like week or two, I read it correctly for the first time, and I think we've known each other for a couple months or so. I ran into you online via Cassidy Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was on her Facebook or something, and there was a list of friends, and I was like, oh, there's another tattooed dude, looks like he's going to school and stuff. That's pretty neat. And was like, well, let's see if we can be friends. And there's responding to the situation, but there's also like you're doing it with a skill. I mean, it's been cool to watch this book come out and people get kind of excited about it, and just the forward motion of I have this project for a class, but I believe in it and it's good and it's enough for you, right? Like
Yeah.
you process it that you're willing to put it out there. And I think that sets it, it's just, even if to give yourself like the credit of just a hair above, like,
Yeah.
just kind of floating along because you're putting that effort out there because it's worked, right?
There are internet theologians out there, right? That are in similar situations to us. I would say that take themselves way too seriously, and kind of take the work too seriously.
Yeah.
And I want to be as authentic as possible in saying that this is something that was birthed out of a world religions class. It started off being kind of this weird conversation with Christianity, Theravada Buddhism, and Hinduism for this class, um, to get an A. Like I wrote this thing to get
Right.
an A, and then I got excited about it. It became
Mm.
something bigger than like this A that I was looking to get. And then I started sharing it with some people, and other people were like, "I want a copy of it," and I'm like, "I personally, I wanted it in print, right?" And I'm poor, um, and my church only allows me to make so many copies of things before they start to get mad at me. So I was like, I'll do this. And yeah, the response has been great. It's been cool to see how people like it. I have old friends, guys that knew me when I was still coming back into faith, wrestling with faith, that bought copies. I had a buddy text me last night, just a picture of him holding it. And I was like, that's like that means something to me. And I changed it for the print version, so it's I do a lot of work. It sounds so dumb to say that. I've done a lot of research into indigenous spirituality and Native American wisdom, and contextualizing ministry towards Native communities. Um, and so I took out the Hinduism part and plugged in indigenous wisdom for the print copy. So the book is Conflation, Pluralistic Devotions. It's on Amazon. Just search Conflation, Ryan Remington. You'll find it. Or you can go to my website, which my wife has graciously allowed me to build, called asacredrebellion.com. That's asacredrebellion.com. That was kind of funny. I went to my wife with this idea, and we're poor, and I said, I want to do this thing. I think at some point it'll pay for itself. But right now, obviously it's not. So I'll make a deal with you. Anytime I want to DoorDash food, you just ask me if it's worth the cost of a website. Because Squarespace is $20 a month. Me DoorDashing food is well over that. So that's kind of been the trade-off. And that she's really held me accountable since doing it. But it also gives me an opportunity to write more, which is huge for me. The hope is to start bringing in outside voices. So there's a number of individuals that I go to school with that I think have just phenomenal points of view, that I've reached out to and like, hey, do you want to like write something for this? There's some indigenous folk that I've been connected with that are going to do some writing for it as well. And so the
Are you gonna do
website,
that in the concept of like print, more like zine style, what you're doing now, or are you gonna
yeah,
do it like blog stuff like that?
the
Both.
website will be just straight blogs.
Okay.
So, but like, I haven't said anything about this, but I wrote a book of prayers I went to lunch with a buddy of mine yesterday, um, and I was telling him about it. But like, I was thinking about kind of what I want for conflation, what I want for the website, what I want for this idea of sacred rebellion, right? And we'll talk about this later. This kind of punk rock authenticity piece of
Mm.
things, but um, I've experienced moments in my life, and I think anybody who's honest with themselves have experienced moments in life where your own words are not enough. Um, and
Mm.
so with the website, it became this thing of like my experiences only go so far in telling kind of the story of the human experience. So I want to bring in outside voices. A friend of mine, also a CTS student, their name is Tyne. They're this rad, gender fluid punk rocker, and they also did a zine as a final project called Transvestments.
Oh, yes.
And it's so
Yes.
good. They sent me a copy of it, and it's like I want, if nothing else, I want to be able to provide a space for you to speak your truth, right, and to share
Mhm.
your experiences. And so like they're all on board with what we're doing. And so it became this idea of creating this space, creating this outlet for people, and creating a larger community around authenticity in Christendom, which I don't necessarily see a lot of.
Let's talk a bit about this kind of idea of you're building a space where people can come and share it. To me, that punk ethos that I think is lacking in often in
Mm-hmm.
theological spaces. It's something that I don't know, but I also don't think it's something that is exceptionally true for people that like look punk, whatever the hell that is. Like, I think it's, but ultimately these localized communities, people coming together. There's merch tables out. There's people handing over these little, you know, attempts at conversation
Yeah.
beyond the stage or whatever. I think it was very natural, at least the scene that I grew up in South Texas, to have all sorts of voices and folks. It wasn't without its own flaws and its own terrible times, but I learned that first
Mm-hmm.
from the like, kind of punk and hardcore scene before I learned it from the church, if the church ever really taught it to me well. Um, how much of that drive of you um, is it leaning more towards like the punk ethos, or is it leaning more towards something you've learned from the church?
Oh, it's definitely leaning more towards that punk ethos. I remember growing up, there was a venue in Indianapolis called the Emerson Theater. And it was, can I cuss on this?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. It was a shithole. I mean,
Yeah,
it was just a disgusting place.
yeah.
But like, if your band played the Emerson, you made it, right?
Yeah.
And there was a
Mm,
time in the Indianapolis hardcore punk scene where a local show could sell out the Emerson. And we're talking like 350. Um,
wow.
and that was like the benchmark of success. So when like a friend's band would get on an Emerson bill, they would do everything they could to get all the rest of their buddies on the same bill, right? Because
Mm,
it was this huge thing. And I was watching a comedy thing on YouTube this morning, and it was Josh Johnson talking about Kendrick's pop out concert,
mm,
um, and how Kendrick put on all of these people from the West Coast onto this thing. And then he was talking about Nipsey Hussle and how Nipsey kept giving back to the community and stuff. But within certain subsects of the larger culture, these subcultures, whatever, there is almost the only way we win is to win together. mindset. And I think that, yeah, you lose that at some point, or people lose that at some point as they transition out of that into a more mainstream cultural appeal. But for those people that are still in it, right? That's who they are. It's been bred into them. It's been beaten into them.
Mhm.
And I would much rather be shoulder to shoulder with somebody who has that same mentality than standing in front of a group of people, if that makes sense.
Right.
I I always feel weird being the person talking when it's a collective thing.
Mm, right. If you're at like a table
Yeah,
conversation, right? Yeah, I constantly like in classrooms even like I'll offer something and I'll regularly apologize and say like, oh, I'm sorry that took me too long. He's always aware of the temptation of it. I don't want anything to be like the Harley show. I mean, my wife and I work with Love as a Seed. People are we have a jewelry business and people are always like, why don't you have your like name on it or anything? And we just want something that's a mantra that people can walk by, right?
yeah,
And I hope that's sort of like the way I think. I mean, your own work, right, with like a sacred rebellion, like that should stick. That'll stick in someone's head if they
yeah,
never look at you again. They're gonna be like, oh, what's sacred about rebellion? What's a rebellion? How am I rebelling? How am I not? How should I? Right?
yeah.
It automatically triggers this kind of flow of conversation. Um, yeah, I really am. I mean, some of what I want monastery to be is this sort of place of that that uh, those subgenres, however large or small they get, but I think really in the locality, right, in the
Yeah.
really close, this sense of real community and an open uh, not to sound this is a problem with being in theology school, right? Everything sounds like you're from theology school, but a literal open table.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I remember like the thing that impressed me so much was it was the same people that were like frontlining bands that were at the like Food Not Bombs and feeding
Mhm.
people, right? There was ego and it was there for the moment because it's what you needed to get your own energy to get up there and do the thing,
Yeah.
right? Ego isn't bad, you know, um, but it wasn't to the point of like egotism and like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, and if that did happen, that got squashed. People were like, "That's not what this is for." You know, we're literally trying to survive
Yeah.
and do it well.
Hmm.
John Cobb recently passed. John Cobb Jr. Are you? Is he someone you're into or have intersected with at all?
So, I mean, not as much as I probably should.
There's no
I
should. I mean,
I came into process theology at a weird time in my life. Sorry, my
okay.
dog is wanting attention from you. You can
Hi.
say hi.
Is this Moose?
This is Moose.
Hey, Moose. I heard
Yeah,
you were hanging out with some neighbors today.
yeah. Go bed. Sorry about
Uh,
that.
no, no, no.
Um, I spent 12 years of my life in active addiction. And I was in a half price books. And I grew up in the church, left the church.
Denomination, if I might ask.
I grew up fundamental Baptist. We went Southern Baptist when we moved to Indiana. And then I went to a Church of God college where they subsequently asked me to leave. Um, so, uh,
Wow, that's a journey.
yeah, it is. Worked for a Missouri Synod nonprofit, did the non-denom world, and now I'm calling UMC home. So
Well,
I always refer to myself as a theological mutt.
nice.
But I was in a half price books, strung out, and thumbing through the theology section. Um, and I saw this weird watercolor looking cover for a book. Uh, and I bought it not knowing what to expect. I just, the color or the cover of it was trippy. And I was like, okay, I'm
Mm.
going to go. And it ended up being On the Mystery by Catherine Keller.
Mm.
And over the course of the 12 years that I was in active addiction, I spent 3 days sober reading that book. And that's the longest stint of sobriety that I'd had until
Wow.
I got sober. Um, so I mean, like Catherine Keller was like my go-to for the longest time in process. And then Thomas J. Ord and like Marjorie Suhaki. Um, but I never got into the Whitehead stuff.
Right.
Um, so Cobb started to break down Whitehead and make Whitehead more accessible to lay people, more or less. And I kind of bypassed all of that. And it's only recently I just bought Christ in a Pluralistic Age for a couple bucks the other day that I started to get into Cobb.
Yeah.
But that's on my 2025 reading list.
Cool.
So
Yeah, I think the you probably did good for it because I've tried to get into Whitehead and I just can't do it.
yeah,
Like, and I live with like the old dead white dudes kind of thing. Obviously, I'm a Merton head, and uh, I got into Cobb because he was a pluralist or pluralist leaning, depending on who you're talking to, and he was a Methodist. And I was like,
yeah,
if I'm going to learn about how to become a Methodist, because I also didn't grow up in that tradition. I grew up Assemblies of God and then went non-denominational, and then I found a rad Methodist couple and was like, tell me more. And they handed me the social principles, and I was like, I don't like all of them, but there's more of them than I've ever heard in any other church. So,
yeah,
uh, and they said they dropped the name John Cobb, and I was like, well, I need to find people that are kind of on the fringes of this so I can know where I'll probably land.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, it's wild to see like what gets picked up with grief around theologians in their kind of ways. Uh, Speaking of Thomas Ord, right? He's been around your book, read through it, loved it, made a
yeah.
reference. Huge.
He it's actually funny. So I've got a book coming out in March called Pelaki Anque, processing liberation through an indigenous lens. It's an annoyingly long title. But I sent a copy to Tom on Facebook. We're Facebook friends, and I randomly added him. I was like, I like his work, and this was right after the death of Omnipotence came out.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, and but I'm poor. Maybe if I'm friends with him on Facebook, I can talk him into sending me a PDF copy of it, right?
Mm.
And so we became friends on Facebook. We kind of interacted a little bit, went back and forth. I told him this is my situation, and he sent me a physical copy of the book. And I was like, you're just a good dude. Like that's all there is to it.
Mm.
But when the very first draft of Pelaki Anque, when I finished that, I sent it to him, and I was like, "Hey, like, read over this. I think this is up your alley." And he emailed me back or messaged me back on Facebook and told me his thoughts. One of them being that I needed to write an introduction for it. So the introduction, I obviously very prominently name drop Thomas J. Ord.
You should. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's funny to me that like people who and this goes back to that punk rock thing, right? Um, I got to hug Jordan Buckley at a merch table after an Every Time I Die show, and like that's just what happens, right? These people are
Right.
so accessible to their fans, and it's like you shouldn't be. Like you're this guy, right? You're in the case of Jordan, it's like you're Jordan Buckley, like the guitar player for one of the greatest bands of all time. Like you should be hanging like out backstage, like not mingling with me. Like that's what's wrong with you. But it's the same thing with these theologians that like I hold near and dear, right? That
Mm,
these are all people that are accessible. They want to be in the conversation. They want to be involved in what's happening in the field. And so with Tom, like the dude's great. I love the fact that that editorial review that he gave for Conflation was great. He laughed about being in Pelakianque. He thinks it's hilarious. So yeah,
it's so good. Like, I think that's a good comparison, right? And I think I've found that I'm at Louisville Seminary here in Kentucky. I've found that like because it's not Harvard, it's not Yale, it's not Princeton, it's not these big places. Um, my peers and I, we forget we're in rooms with incredible theologians. Like, oh, you just messaged this person who's is a big deal, and
yeah.
yet there's these kind of equalizing spaces, and sometimes it's just the humanity of saying, hey, I respect your work and I want to chat about this thing or that thing,
Do
um,
you know Death
I
to the
had that.
World?
I'm a little familiar. I follow them, but I've not looked deeply into their stuff.
So one of my professors, Robert Saylor, wrote a book about Death to the World. Um, and it's so funny to me that like I just texted him the other day. You know what I'm saying? Like it's that
Right.
thing of like how special of a life do we have that we have access to this level of brilliance.
Right.
One of my professors, Dr. Russell, I thank her in Conflation, but like her best friend in the whole world, Marjorie Suhaki. I told her that story about me being sober for 3 days reading on the mystery, and she emailed Catherine Keller and was like, "Hey, I have a student that's a fan of yours," and it's just like how special of a life is this? Like, how did we get to be so lucky to be in these circles?
Because it could easily have been a name drop, like, oh yeah, I know Catherine
Yeah,
Keller.
yeah,
No, it's like, let me email them.
yeah.
Right.
Back to this notion, right, of like knowing where you come from, right, building this community, and ensuring that all in your community are able to eat. But more than that, I think to quote Bun B, right, Trill recognize Trill.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Uh,
and I think that there are I'm not I'm not doing theology right on any level that's not applicable. And
mm,
I think that like when you come to things from that space, when it becomes about I am trying to bring as much authenticity, as much realness, as much practicality and tangibility to this thing that is so impractical and intangible, that people seem to recognize and align with it in really cool ways.
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, um, I love the Bun B reference, and that's another thing about community, right? Like it's this um everybody eats, but then also we feed the people around us that are like this kind of concentric circles,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It stretches way past whatever our type or space, like and what we I think it's interesting the circles we don't know. When I see someone doing the work well, I want to be near it, or I want to be
yeah,
close to it, or I want to be and I will kind of forsake other stuff that's not that. Um, let's see, we've talked about conflation. Um, talked a little bit about the book in March. That's the date for it.
yeah.
Uh,
March 3rd, I want to say.
and that's awesome. I got to read a little bit of that. Um, early on. It's probably changed a whole bunch since
Yeah.
then. Um, the thing that I what one of the things I loved about it, and I I'm learning how important this is as I read people that aren't dead and white. This idea of like identifying your social location and saying things like, I grew up poor or I am actively actively poor. This was the area, all these sort of things. And I think it comes naturally to folks that have always had to defend themselves in the spaces that they're not supposed to be in,
Yeah.
like folks that are like, oh, I'm first generation education, much less theology school, much
Yeah.
less divinity school. Um, and where that moves from being like self-deprecation to just really truly identification. Like, has that been that social location exercise, that reflexivity? Is that something you've learned? Uh, where'd you get that skill? Because that not every writer does that.
I think for me, I'm a walking bag of just trauma responses and mental health issues. So part of that is not feeling comfortable in the spaces that I'm in. And so announcing that up front, right? I grew up as a fat kid. So it was always that thing of like, if I say, hey, I'm fat, then the people making fun of me can't use that against me.
Mm,
Um, and so just by clearly stating, I don't belong here, is me hopefully mitigating that response to what I'm doing. But it's also setting it up saying, look, I'm an outside perspective looking into this. And one of the things that I hope that I did with Peleakiankwe was I hope I set it up to say I am a vessel at most for these other voices, right? Um, Nobody, I say that loosely, very few people know who Dr. Casey Church is, right?
mm,
And Dr. Casey Church is single-handedly revolutionizing contextual ministry in the Southwest in the UMC.
mm,
And the work that this guy's doing is without equal. Um, but I can frame his story in such a way that makes it more accessible because I'm not writing to the academics. And that's born out of the fact that I can't write academically. I am not a good professional writer. You can ask any of my professors. That's their biggest complaint, right? Um, and so I got an A minus in New Testament because I can't write professionally, which is a very sore subject for me. Um, but I think that in a lot of ways, acknowledging your social location, acknowledging your social location helps to acknowledge internal biases that the writer has, right? Just in me saying this is where I'm coming from, that gives you insight into what biases I might bring to the table. But it also hopefully stirs you, the reader, to kind of check your internal biases and social location to know what you're bringing to the table as well.
uh, but and I think that upfrontness of it does that exact thing. And
Mhm.
I was hoping like you'd get there because I think uh, there's something valuable to saying, do I have something to say in this if I'm not part of the community?
Yeah.
And there's something more valuable or additionally valuable to pushing past that into I'm going to face that. I'm going to face whatever biases kind of show up that I didn't know about. I grew up uh, in a different context, but the same kind of idea. I grew up with the word Baptist was Southern
Mhm.
Baptist.
Yeah.
I didn't know there were other Baptists. I moved to Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's some amazing Baptist traditions in this area. Like doing justice work like I've never seen before. And I had to literally show up in front of somebody and undo, like cut open the back of my head and let it all fall out. Any of the Baptist jokes and the oh Baptist, like and I still am always regularly catching myself do that because I didn't know any other
Yep.
form. I didn't know any other way. And so when reading a text that's for people to be introduced to a theologian, to be introduced to indigenous wisdom, to be introduced to these works, or even something like pluralism, like so kind of back to conflation, right? Like uh, it's an active book. There's multiple layers to it. Each day you have uh, this track to follow. Um, and what I loved is you didn't kind of like, all right, we're gonna like start out with the Christian practice, and then maybe if they get to day 14, we'll drop like a quote from the Vedas,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
we'll drop a quote from the Dhammapada, right?
Yeah.
It's all right there in front of you, and that's a gift of the book that doesn't happen always, because I've gotten tons. I love religious pluralism. I think it's an important future of the church.
Hmm.
Hopefully, an important future of the Methodist Church. I've not seen, that's a whole other conversation, but I've just not seen that really engaged with. And I
Yeah.
feel like we're set up as a denomination to do it well, but we've had our head in some orifices for too long about other things that shouldn't have even been questions.
Yeah.
But this idea of the book really kind of, it you can't, in my experience of it, and I've only walked through a couple pages of it, but uh, I guess you could just read the Christian text and then move on. I mean, I guess you could, but you're not going to get the fullness of what the prompt is.
No, and I think that so my current head pastor, he's amazing in many regards. But the man gave a sermon that broke open the way that I think about things. Um, and to hear it coming from him, to hear it coming in my specific context, to hear what he had to say about it, and then the conversation that he and I had following it, the idea was that maybe, and this was posited on a Sunday morning service, um, maybe God is shining a light through the prism of religion, and for us, we see the fullness of that light, the full spectrum of color, through the prism of Christ. But if you look at these other traditions, right, within Islam, it might show the blues. Within Hinduism, it might show the reds. And these other traditions might show these colors, but as Christians, we believe that the fullness of color is seen through the person of Christ. Um, and that had such a profound impact on me as an idea. But when it comes to the conflation and me purposefully putting these three seemingly disparate ideas together is to show how similar they are, right? Because
Hmm.
each day is a theme, um, and in each of these traditions, right? You have leaders, you have scriptures, you have thoughts, ideas that are all saying the same thing, just using different language. And that's one thing, like we were talking about Cobb earlier, right? Cobb was a big eco theologian. Like he was
Right.
huge into it. Um, and for me, it in a lot of ways, and this jumps into Pelagiankwe as well. We're just now catching up with indigenous wisdom in many regards. Um, and
100%.
something like eco-theology, right? The sacredness of this space is something that we lost due to capitalism, colonization, whatever, many things that took our attention away from the earth. But the land has always been sacred within indigenous traditions. And there's always been a respect and deep care for it. And if you look at the Christian tradition as well, like that's there. We just gloss over it.
Right.
And so in conflation, hopefully, I'm able to kind of shine a light on these areas of existence of the human condition, of kind of points of commonality in you and I, but also in these traditions, and then
Mm.
give you something to do with that, give you something to wrestle with that, because it's not enough to say, "Hey, this exists," right?
Right.
I want you to do the work
Hmm.
on some level, even if it is just going putting your feet in the grass. Like
Hmm.
once you have that connection, you realize that no, this is something special. This is something sacred. Um,
Hmm.
and that's kind of the whole idea going back to sacred rebellion, um, and kind of the jumping off point for this conversation. We really have sanitized what we believe sacred is. Um, we have really sanitized the gospel, we've sanitized faith, we've sanitized community, and we've turned it into this sterile hospital room, um, as opposed to like the front lines of a battlefield, so to speak. Right?
Right.
Nobody's getting triage in a trench from somebody in dress whites, um, and I think that for me, that's a lot of where this punk rock aspect of it comes in. Is punk rock is so authentic and real and in your face about the authenticity.
Mm.
Um, and for me, that ethos, that mindset, that willingness, despite what might be going on in popular culture, despite what might be going on, here, there, or anywhere else, this is who I am. This is where I make my stand. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that when it comes to conflation or Pelagianque or the website or any of the stuff that I'm doing or plan to do, I think being able to plant that flag and to say that I'm trying to create an authentic community that refuses to whitewash or sanitize the gospel is that's all I can do.
That's the benefit of the punk scene, right? It's like, um, whether it's 30 people in a room,
Mm-hmm.
whether five people pay attention or 5,000 people or whatever, like you're not moving from this place. Like this is the thing I'm here for. And then also like I think the benefit of authenticity is we change over time,
Yeah,
and we can. I don't think in normative genres and communities. I think there's such a repeated refrain of, oh, but it's not like it used to be, or it should be like it was. This is the church issue too, right? Like, let's get back to the original kind of. But we didn't ask, where are we right now? Like,
yeah,
what's the thing we need to say today, right? Um, and I hear you doing that, saying like, no, no, like right now we've been ignored. Like, it's not that Christianity has no eco theology. It is though that we should have this reminder that our siblings in indigenous traditions, in other religious traditions, have been practicing this way longer than we've allowed ourselves to. So, and I think with pluralism and with punk rock, right? Like I, anything we learn, right? Not just punk, but like no one knows everything coming out, right?
yeah,
This ability to put yourself in a posture of learning, of like being a student again. This is a big thing in Buddhism, right? Like the beginner's mind, um, truly being able to both be declarative and like, no, this is where I'm at, and I've met something, I've encountered something that shifted me, not away from it, but maybe where I had to dig a little deeper, and I'm willing to listen and I'm willing to see it differently for whatever reason. The idea of liner notes, and I've been playing around with this kind of way of talking about like something that goes beyond just like the punk and hardcore thing, although that's what it was for me. It was very
Yep.
much back in the day. I don't know this. What's our difference in age? I'm 40.
I'm 41.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So same. Right.
Yeah.
So like I remember it was you get a CD from a buddy or you go to a mall and you get it. And I mean, the first thing I did before throwing it in even is I'm looking and I'm reading all the lyrics and I'm, flipping through and I go to the back and I'm like, who are all the thank yous? What are
Yep.
the next 10 bands I'm going to like be into, right? Because they
Yeah.
toured with them or they were interested in them. Um, I remember, and I need to find the CD in person to make sure this is not a lie, but I'm pretty sure it was Evil Empire by Rage. Um, the fold out is like them singing, but then the opposite side of it is just stacks and stacks of books.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a, you know, it was a weird world, right? Like we went to church on Sunday. My parents were like potheads and like teaching me all of that sort of thing. And then also they were like protesting outside of abortion clinics. Like all of that was true all at the same time. And I'm like, I don't know how to, I mean, I'm like 9 or whatever,
Yeah.
but I get that Rage Against the Machine record. And I had never heard about women's justice. I'd never heard
Hmm.
about the Zapatistas. And I lived in South Texas. The church wasn't talking about that. Even the people that I was starting to kind of be around, they weren't talking about that. But this back of the CD was like, oh, and there's the website. I can just go look it up, right?
Yeah.
Went to the library and I said, why don't you have uh, Cleaver? Why don't you have, Marcus? Why don't you have all these other people? They're like, oh, we don't have those books. I'm like, well, can you get them? Right. And it's just this way, it's a window out into the world, right? Kind of with each conversation I have at some point this idea of like the liner notes. Like, so what's something, and you've already mentioned the finding the book at the half price, which I think is
Hmm.
sort of a liner note thing, right, of your life if it was
Yeah.
written out. But what's something that you can think of that you were like, oh, I started here, and because of this, I found this.
So, this is going to sound like a tangent, but it's going somewhere.
I love it.
My dad worked on the road my whole life. Um, he built landfills. So he would be gone for like 6 months and then home for a weekend and then back out on the road, right? So 0 to 18, I had no tangible relationship with my dad. But he had records. Um, and my dad was a big prog rock guy. He died running a progressive metal radio show on the internet.
Wow.
Still had a mullet. Um,
Nice.
but my dad was this prog rock guy, and my way of communicating with him to start off was listening to his records. Um, so I remember, my mom was very conservative when I was young, um, and over time that loosened. Um, but my dad had these records that like they had naughty words on them, and like Frank Zappa was in there, and
Oh,
so like I'm cutting my teeth on Frank Zappa, and then I've got my mom who won't let me do anything worldly. So like I had this weird dichotomy as well. But as I got older, and my dad started to recognize that this was a pattern, right, of me trying to understand him, understand who I was, figure out what it was to be a man, all of the things that happen in adolescence for guys. He started to bring home new CDs. And there was a Christian hip hop band called XL and DVD. I'm pretty sure my dad and I are the only people that have ever heard of them. Um, but we had a weight room in our basement. And by that, I mean we had a weight bench and like 25 pounds worth of weights.
Like,
Um, and my dad left this XL and DVD tape on the boombox that was down there. And I remember specifically one of the tracks was talking about racism. And the lyric
mm.
that sticks in my head is, if racism was a man and I had a 12 gauge, I'd shoot him in the face because the Lord God said so. Um,
Whoa.
and like, as an adult, I pray that I didn't make that up. You know what I'm saying? Like, I pray that that's real, that that's not some weird broken childhood memory. But when I would get into something, my dad would make a point of seeking out a Christian alternative for that thing. Um, so like when Mighty Mighty Boss Tones or Big Bad Voodoo Daddy or kind of that new wave, third wave ska thing hit, my dad tracked down Five Iron Frenzy for me, and I fell in love.
It's,
Um, and
Five Iron's still solid. Like they're
oh,
still
Five Iron's
putting out
amazing.
neat stuff. Oh,
I quote Five Iron. I got a hold of them on Facebook again, and just begged them. I was like, look, like legally, I need to get your permission because you own the rights to all your music. I need your permission to print one of your lyrics in this book. Can I have permission? And I sent them like 4 messages over the course of a month. And finally, I think they got annoyed and they were like, yeah, fine. I was like, cool, thanks. Um, but so as far as liner notes go, like my dad was that guy for me. And for my dad, there was no distinction between the sacred and the secular.
mm.
Um, and like,
Like he wasn't even having that conversation. He was just like,
no,
I don't see it. Yeah,
yeah. Um,
I love that.
and for him, it was more about like, stop listening to crap you hear on the radio and listen to good stuff. And
Mm.
it didn't matter what good stuff was. I remember being in youth group, and of course, we had that night where everybody brought in their Korn and Marilyn Manson albums and smashed them in a trash can.
Yeah.
And it was just like, how much of our parents' money did we waste doing that? Um,
Yeah.
but like for me, that was so wrong feeling because
Mm.
that's not how I was brought up when it came to music. And for me, it was always about listen to the good stuff. It was never like listen to the stuff that's praising Jesus. So like, um, the my dad was huge in that regard for me. And to this day, like I can trace everything that I love musically back to my father's influence. But beyond that, right, it goes into all of the things that I like. My dad, for as much of a grumpy curmudgeon that he was at the end, he was kind of like the original hipster. And so you talk a lot about Merton, and I love Matthew Kelty.
Mm.
And it's like, no, like Kelty's like the cooler Merton. Um, and
Uh,
it's so stupid, right? But it's like he's the underground Merton, like he's the B-side Merton. Um,
that's so good. The B-side Merton. Oh, I love it.
and so it's just one of those things to where like the way that I view the world has been shaped so much by listening to Steely Dan or Yes or Zappa or Captain Beefheart or whatever of like my dad's old record collection.
Yeah. Well, that's so good. Oh my gosh. Like, condolences on the loss of your father. Today's the anniversary of my own dad's death, and
Yeah,
it's uh it's a mess. How long has he been transitioned?
4 years,
Or yeah, oh gosh, so 2021.
2020,
Okay, my dad
October
passed in
2020.
2021. Yeah, it's a huge loss. Like I grew up around vinyl too. It's very much the like. I love the reflection of good,
Yeah,
right? Like what's quality, like what is who's saying something,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to repeating things. And I mean that I can see it in your, devotion, so to speak, to authenticity and this. I think the move from like prog rock or like my dad was a huge, Mason Prophet?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. So you're like the third person I've mentioned that band to, and they're like, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's so many like moves from like 60s, 70s rock, like right into punk, and then
Yeah.
obviously punk folds right into hardcore. I don't think there is. There's just not much time between them. They're just because it was what's happening on the news, what's going
Mhm.
on right now, and what can we say about it? What has to be said about it? That was what you were saying earlier about your own, the things you're doing with your life right now. These books and this conversation and the things that you do are like it's for the practical. It's for
Mhm.
the the right now. Um, there's plenty of people trying to write for 100 years from now without any promise of that being the case.
I fell in love with liberation theology for the simple idea, like, what the hell does it matter if it doesn't matter now?
Mm.
Um, and I don't want to write in such a way that somebody at some point down the road is going to study the words that I have to say, or say, "Oh, he was innovative," or "Oh, like, I don't." That's I'm not looking to do that. I'm looking to do something in this moment. I'm looking to do
Mm.
something right now. I'm looking to affect change, even if it's in one life, even if it's just my life, right? I'm looking to do something that's transformative in the here and now, to alleviate suffering, to push back against the system that creates suffering, to give people some sort of momentary release from whatever they're experiencing. Um, and if that's a well-timed fart joke, then I've done my job, kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um, but at the end of the day, if we're not doing things that have tangible, um, that have tangible, recognizable weight to them, then it's kind of all for naught. I
right.
mean, we could sit here and wax poetic or pontificate um, about X, Y, or Z, but it doesn't change anything, right? What
Mm.
what changes is you and I deepening a relationship, um, forming a bond, creating a small community that hopefully has ripple effects outward, that touches or creates a larger community around this conversation. And those people feel empowered to then go and create those conversations in their own spaces. Because at the end of the day, like, um, yes, I want to promote the work that I'm doing, obviously, but I don't want to promote it to line my pockets. I want to promote it because I think it matters, because I think that it has weight, and because I think that it can change something.
Absolutely. Well, and you're pushing it back against the assumption of like a punk rock authenticity is essentially nihilistic. I remember back in the day it was
Hmm.
very much like, oh, it's all negative, like fuck it all, it's not going to go anywhere, it's all burning anyway. And I hear that a lot in like social justice circles. I've
Yeah,
had conversations with peers that are like, the earth isn't going to make it to 2028. Why am I investing in, why am I worried about these things? And this kind of chiropractic adjustment of like, but the immediate now, like
yeah,
we can do that because there really isn't. It's and Joe Strummer was right. The future is unwritten.
yeah,
But we have pens though, right? And there's some paper laying around. So let's write something, even if it doesn't go for. Why go for eternity, right? That's an argument all the time in the Merton world. Like I'm constantly being asked questions about how do we keep up with it? How do we let it go? And like Cass was the legendary figure who was like, maybe we don't.
yeah,
Maybe let the dude die. Like let him rest. Like maybe, and I don't think he wrote for. I don't, and this would get me in a shit ton of trouble, I think, if if any of the Merton people watch to this point in the conversation. But maybe he didn't want to be around for 150, 200 years. Maybe I don't think he did, because it was very much like I read Baldwin. Here's my thoughts. King died. I immediately wrote a letter to Coretta.
Mhm.
Right. It was this immediacy. His journals are very much like, here's what it is. Here's what it is. And a whole lot of asking for forgiveness. Right. I think
Yeah.
that's the benefit of authenticity too. Right. Is I'm going to say something stupid, and I'm going to have the authenticity, right, to say, yeah, I screwed it up. Like, I said something that was way off base, and thank you for calling me on it. Right. That's the gift, that if you're trying to build like an empire out of a name, or of a style, or a podcast, or an image, or whatever, or a denomination, right,
Yeah.
then you're never gonna, you can't have humility in that place. So people can reach out to you online, Facebook, Instagram. Thank you for jumping on. I'm really glad. Let's do it again.
Yeah, brother. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Peace.
See ya.
You have been listening to a Monastery podcast. I'm Harley Matthews, and I want to remind you that this space exists to intersect theology, religious history, and culture, all with a bend toward the heavy. Thank you for listening. Take time to share, comment, like this post, and then get involved with future episodes. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your ideas and thoughts for future episodes. If you've got questions, if you've thought of contemplation in a way that intersects with the heavy, let me know. Let's talk about it. The music you're hearing behind the intro outro of this episode was gifted to us by the band Miriam, and unreleased tracks from the album Visitors. So I want to thank them. You can find more about them in the show notes below.